Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, we're back with another Survivor casting video. This time doing a topic that I've been planning on doing for a while. Now, in the past, I have done Survivor Rivals, but here we're going to be doing the complete opposite of that. So here we're going to be doing Survivor Dynamic Duos, essentially a blood versus water-esque season with pairs of players that performed well together in the past. This is an idea that, again, has been suggested to me for a while. It's something I've always planned on doing. However, didn't actually put together a cast until now, and through the process of making this video, it did make me realize that I don't think this is that great of an idea. The problem with casting dynamic duos is that the majority of duos that are out there from Survivor history contain at least one player that doesn't want to play again. Again, this is a video where I'm going to try to make a semi-realistic cast, but when you think of the all-time great duos, a lot of them aren't going to end up returning because of at least one person there not wanting to return or can't return, which I do think severely harms the point of the season to begin with. But to fully explain this, let's run through every season of Survivor from season 1 to 40, talking about the duos I considered and the ones I did end up putting on my cast here. Again, a semi-realistic cast. Now let's start off with Borneo. And again, straight up, the cast I end up putting together here is a very recent cast. Like, it's a cast of a lot of players within the 30s, largely because, again, like, I don't think there are that many duos from the past that have people that want to come back. Like, if we're looking at Borneo, I mean, I think the first one that comes to my mind is Rich and Rudy, but obviously Rudy, rest in peace. You have like a Kelly and Sue, but I feel like that fits a rival season more so, and even then, like, Sue won't come back, and I don't know how much they want Wigglesworth anyway. You have like a Colleen and a Greg, which would be cool to come back, but it's like, I don't think they want to come back, either of them. So it's like, there really is no real option here from Borneo, despite it being a cast I would like to see some pairs come back from. Next, we have Australian Outback, and a similar thing here. Obviously, Roger and Elizabeth comes to mind. I don't think Elizabeth wants to come back. You got Amber and Jerry, which would be an interesting duo, but I don't think Amber would want to come back. Alicia and Varner would be interesting, but again, Varner obviously not coming back at this point. The main duo from season 2 that I did really consider was Tina and Colby, where I feel like both of them are willing to come back. I think the problem is the fact that production didn't put Tina on Winners at War. And if they're not putting her on Winners at War, like, how likely is it that they're going to bring her back for a dynamic duos season? I think pretty small. Though I do think this is the most realistic duo to be on a season like this. But at the end of the day, I just felt like there were other duos that felt like bigger locks to me. Though this is one that I would like to see on the cast in an ideal situation. Now from Africa, there's a lot of duos here. The problem is, again, I just don't feel like any of them are super likely to return. You have something like a T-Bird and a Frank, who, again, like, Frank's not coming back. Lindsay and a Silas. Silas isn't coming back. You have Ethan with Lex, Ethan with Tom. I don't think Ethan wants to come back. So at that point, I think the most likely duo here is Lex and Tom. However, Tom kind of falls into the same issue I have with like a Tina, where it's like they are getting up there in age. And I feel like at this point in Survivor, I don't know how incentivized production is to bring them back. Plus also, I don't think Tom in particular has aged well in terms of his political correctness on the show. And I don't think that's something that they need back either. So I did decide to cut Lex and Tom as well, despite them being pretty far into my considerations. Now from Marquesas, I got a lot of duos on this cast, but again, I don't think any of them are likely returnees. You have a Tammy and John Carroll, which would be interesting, but I don't think Tammy wants to come back, and I don't think production's particularly interested in them anyway. Pascal and Nalia, but it's like, again, same thing. And then Sean and Vesepia is the major one here, which I would really like to see back. They would definitely be a duo on my dream cast if I ever get around to doing that video. But again, realistically, production clearly doesn't like Vesepia. They don't want her back. And Sean is someone that they've been pretty quiet on, so I do think at the end of the day, they're probably not super likely returnees. Next up, we have Thailand, and I mean, come on. Obviously, Brian and Clay is technically like a power duo there, but it's like, I mean, they're not bringing back Brian and Clay. From the Amazon, here we do have a couple pairs. First one that I thought of is obviously Jenna and Heidi. I think the problem there is, one, Heidi doesn't want to play again, and two, I don't believe they're even friends anymore. I do believe there was a falling out between the two, which, to be fair, would make it a more interesting season, but at the end of the day, I don't look at them as super likely returnees anyway. And then I did also consider Matthew and Rob Cesternino, which would be really interesting. But again, I think it's a similar thing where I don't think they care about Matt, and I think Rob doesn't want to play again. From Per Islands, we have a couple pairs here. None of them are super major considerations. I mean, you got Sandra and Krista, which would be interesting, but I think Sandra has better pairs outside of this one. Fairplay and Burton would be interesting, but again, I think they are not big fans of Fairplay. And then I think you got Andrew Savage and Rhino, who, like, I did briefly consider, but it's like, are they really bringing back Rhino? And like, how much is Savage really a priority for him? So I decided to cut them as well. Now for All Stars, and again, a few pairs here. We got Kathy and Lex, who I did consider for a while, but again, I think Kathy's getting up there in age, so I don't know how incentivized production feels like they need to bring her back at this point. Again, I think Tina is a more likely returnee than Kathy, and even Tina I don't expect to see again. Jenna Lewis and Rupert was an interesting one that I considered for a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's like, I don't think they're major priorities. I do think both of them are willing to play again. I wouldn't mind seeing them on this cast, but realistically, I think they would go with other options. And then obviously I had to consider Boss Rob and Amber. I think they are the main duo that production would try to get. I don't think they would say yes for this. Again, they barely said yes for Winners at War. I think they're definitely turning down a dynamic duo season. They did turn down Blood versus Water. So I do think more than likely for Dynamics duo season, I don't see them saying yes for it. Now for Vanuatu, considered a couple duos here. We do have Twyla and Scout and Amy and Leanne. The problem with them is I don't think production is particularly incentivized to bring back people like Scout or Leanne. And while I do think Amy and Twyla have a semblance of a chance of making it into a cast like this, I don't think their partners are that likely. So I did cut them as well. Now for Palau, where again, we do have a couple notable pairs here, but I don't think any of them are particularly likely. First up, we do have Stephanie and Bobby John, who again aren't even that much of a dynamic duo, but they are obviously two Survivor players that are paired together due to them being the last players on New Long. And I don't think either of them are that unlikely to say yes to a return. I think Stephanie wants to play again. I wouldn't be surprised if Bobby John wants to play again. However, I just feel like there's more interesting pairs out there than those two. And also, it's like, I think Bobby John's kind of faded from production's mind anyway. And then after that, we have two other pairs, both of them involving Ian. We obviously have Tom and Ian, which is probably the most prominent duo from this cast. And then we have Katie and Ian. Now, from what I understand, Tom has said recently he wouldn't be opposed to returning. But again, he wasn't even called for Winners at War. Like, that's pretty bad. And then Katie, I just think is completely gone from their minds. While Ian supposedly is someone that they really want back, but just keeps on saying no. And I think that's the main thing that really makes all of this unlikely, is the fact that I don't think Ian wants to play again. Again, he obviously had a very bad experience on Palau, and he's done numerous interviews in recent years talking about how he still doesn't want to play again. So I do think the hope of seeing those duos is kind of gone at this point. From Guatemala, we do have a couple duos here. First up, we have Stephanie and Rafe, who I think is the most prominent duo from this cast. The problem is Rafe doesn't want to play again. Again, I think Stephanie would say yes, but I just don't know who her partner would be. The other pair I consider here isn't really that much of a duo, but they are both people from Guatemala that I think would play again. And you can pair them to a degree, and that is Cindy and Judd. The biggest qualm here is the fact that I don't think production liked Judd. And like, while I believe he was in consideration for Blood versus Water, it's like, I don't know how incentivized they are to bring him back. And the same thing goes with Cindy. Like, Cindy was also in consideration for Blood versus Water. And I think they both would be interesting returnees. I just don't think they're super likely returnees. Now for Panama, where like I barely even considered anyone for Panama. Like, you can kind of consider like Shane and Courtney to a degree, but it's like, are they really a duo? I feel like they would more so fit a rival season more than a dynamic duo season. You could do like Shane and Aris, or like Aris and Sari would probably be the more prominent one. The problem is, again, I don't think Aris wants to play again, and Sari probably has better other pairs out there. So I did end up cutting any pairs from Panama. Now from Cook Islands, I did consider a couple pairs, both of them involving Yule. We do have Yule and Becky, which I think is the more actual dynamic duo. And then I did also consider Yule and Ozzy, just because I do think when people think of Cook Islands, those are the two people they think of. I think technically you can probably also consider like a Yule and Penner, but again, I think all this stems on Yule, and I don't think Yule wants to play again. Or at least I don't think he's going to be a person that's easy to get back, and I don't think any of these situations are the way to get him back. I mean, maybe Yule and Penner would be the way, in the sense that maybe through that they can promote the ALS charity, and I think that would incentivize Yule to play again. But really, though, I don't think it's super likely, so I did cut all of these duos as well. Now for Fiji, where I think the most prominent duo here is obviously Earl and Yao, and I think they're a lock for this cast if Yao wanted to play again, which I don't think Yao wants to play again. I think Earl is ready to play again if his life permits it. I don't think Yao wants to play again, so I don't think they make the cut. I mean, outside of that, you kind of have like a Dreams Cassandra, but I think both of them aren't particularly likely returnees. So really, again, no one from Fiji made the cut either. Moving on to China, where we have a couple considerations here. We do have PG and Jamie, which is a duo that I considered for a little while. I don't think either of them are particularly likely returnees at this point, though, particularly Jamie. The more prominent duo that I definitely considered was Todd and Amanda. And there was definitely a point where they were a top consideration for me. The reason I end up cutting them is I just don't see production wanting Todd back at this point. I mean, Todd's at the point now where like there are so many times where he could have been brought back and they just didn't bother calling him. And when you add in the chance of like possible relapse, like I just feel like they're not going to bother. And then Amanda herself is kind of a wonky one as well. She has talked more recently about being willing to play again, but even then, I don't think it's super secure, so I just decided to cut them as well. We got a decent amount of duos here from Micronesia, but again, none of them made the cut. I did consider Jason and Eliza just because it would be funny, but I don't think production wants to see Jason play again, and Eliza's kind of busy, so I decided to cut them. Consider James and Ozzy, which I think both of them are people that are willing to play again. I just don't feel like production's super incentivized to bring either of them back at this point. I mean, for me, James kind of feels like a relic of that era of Survivor, to where I would be pretty surprised if we see James play again, because I don't feel like he's someone that would adapt to the modern game particularly well. And then Ozzy is someone that, even Game Changers, Jeff Probst himself didn't want Ozzy back. So it's like, I feel like it's very unlikely that we're going to get a James and Ozzy duo. They consider a decent amount of female-female duos here, though. We do have Natalie and Alexis, which was one I kind of considered, but I don't think Alexis wants to play again, so I had to cut them. You have some duos with Parvati, really like any of the Black Widow Brigade with Parvati. I mean, you have Parvati Amanda, Parvati Sari, Parvati Natalie. I mean, I think any of those are likely options if Parvati wanted to play again, but again, I just don't see that happening, so I don't think that would happen. Though I think that if I were to pick one of those duos, probably Parvati Amanda would obviously make the most sense, considering they were in the final two. They had a final two deal the entire season. Even though their relationship now is very rocky, it's like I feel like that is the one I would pick. But again, I don't think Parvati wants to play again. And because of that, there was a while where like I did kind of settle with Amanda and Sari, and there was a point where they were on the cast, and I very much considered that for a while. I just, again, don't think Amanda is a guaranteed returnee at this point. I don't think that's someone that is super high on production's wish list. And there's another pair with Sari that I feel like the other option is someone that's a little bit more likely. So for me, I did cut Amanda and Sari as well. Now for Gabon, we have some more duos here that didn't make the cut. We have like Charlie and Marcus, who I don't think either of them are particularly likely returnees. Corinne and Randy, I think would have been a good duo at one point, but I do feel like both of them have kind of fallen out of favor with production. Bob and Sugar is a duo I considered, but again, do we need to see Bob play again? Probably not, and I don't think production wants to see it again anyway. But the main duo I did really consider here, to where they were one of the last duos I ended up cutting, is Kenny and Crystal. The big issue here is Crystal in my eyes. Like, I don't think Crystal is a likely returnee. I don't think production wants to see her back. I don't think she's ever been in consideration to come back. And even then, like, Kenny is someone that I don't really see as super high on their radars either. Like, I do think there's a semblance of a chance of a Kenny return at some point, but even then, like, I think that chance is falling fast, and at this point it is pretty small. So while I would, again, really like to see this duo on this cast, I just don't think it's super likely. And now on to Tocantins, where we're finally gonna put a duo on the cast. Now, first up, a duo I did consider was Sierra and Brendan. However, I don't think either of them want to play again. The main duo from this cast, I think, is the top of everyone's minds, is probably JT and Steven. Again, pretty well known as one of the best duos of all time. The problem here is really with both of them. I mean, JT, from what I understand, has kind of fallen out of favor with production, to where, like, I don't feel like he's super likely to return at this point. And then we have Steven, who doesn't want to play again. So again, this is one of those examples where I'm talking about, again, a very prominent duo that I don't think is very likely to return because neither of the people within the duo are likely to return on their own right. However, the duo I did decide to put back onto this cast is Coach and Tyson. Now, this did take a lot of consideration for me because I do feel like both Coach and Tyson have a lot of other pairs that they could be paired up with. However, I did decide to go with Coach and Tyson here, largely because I feel like, one, Coach, I feel like is still a pretty likely returnee if he wants to come back. Obviously, Tyson Jervis would have been a great consideration for me, but I feel like Coach is a more likely returnee than Jervis. So that's kind of why I went with Coach and Tyson. And then for Coach, I mean, you had like Coach and Sophie as a consideration. But again, I think Sophie has some reservations about returning that Tyson doesn't. So I decided, I think Coach and Tyson seems like the duo here that makes the most sense for me to make the cast at the end of the day. So they are the first duo to make it on the cast. Again, 18 seasons in here. Now from Survivor Samoa. Not many duos here. I mean, if you want to consider like Russell and Natalie, but again, I feel like that's kind of a weird duo to put on this sort of cast. We have like Laura and like Russell Swan, I guess. I don't know. Like, again, there's not much here. Laura and Monica, maybe. I don't know. I feel like Laura Morant actually has a decent amount of duos you can consider her with, but I don't think there's anyone particularly likely here. Now we got heroes versus villains, where, again, I don't think there's any duos here, but definitely some considerations. Boston Rob has a couple duos here. Again, you can have Boston Rob and Tyson. I feel like that would be a cool duo. Boston Rob and Sandra would be a cool duo. Problem is, again, I don't think Boston Rob is a particularly likely returnee, especially for a season of this scale. And the same thing goes with some of the other pairs I consider because they involve Parvati, where, again, I don't think Parvati's coming back. You have Parvati and Russell, Parvati and Danielle. I just don't think Parvati's coming back here. I guess you consider like Russell and Jerry, but it's like I don't think Russell is a particularly likely returnee at this point either. So really for me, just all the duos here kind of fell flat. Now for Nicaragua, where I did have a decent amount of considerations here, but all these duos had some major issues here in terms of returning chances. First up, we have Chase and Holly. I mean, come on, Chase is not playing Survivor again. And also, I don't think they particularly need Holly at this point. You got Sash and Brenda. I don't think either of them are particularly likely returnees at this point, particularly Sash. You got Marty and Jill, which is like, I would love to see Marty again, but I mean, come on, this is not happening. No one from Nicaragua made the cut. From Redemption Island, had a few pairs I considered. I think a major one to me was Rob and Allie, but again, I don't think Boston Rob is in consideration to return again. You also have Rob and Philip, kind of similar thing. You have Stephanie and Russell. I don't think Russell's likely to return. I think you have Mike and Steve, who I would actually not be opposed to seeing again. Like, I actually like Steve. I think Steve is an underrated player in the grand scheme of things. But it's like, come on, Mike and Steve are not returning to Survivor. Or at least Steve in general. Like, I mean, Mike actually was in consideration for a decent while. Like, up to second chance. I know he was still in the casting pool, but I think at this point, his chances are gone. The main consideration for me from Redemption Island, the duo that did make it the furthest into the process, was Natalie and Ashley. However, I did end up cutting them just because, I don't know, they felt kind of bland to me. Like, while I wouldn't be opposed to either of them returning on their own right, I think to have them back as a duo seems like a kind of a weird prospect. So I decided to cut them as well. Now from South Pacific, again, considered Coach and Sophie. But I felt like Coach and Tyson were the better duo there. Sophie and Albert was another one that I considered. But again, I don't think they liked Albert that much. And I think Sophie, again, had some reservations about coming back. So I decided to cut them. And I did also consider Cochran and Dawn. But again, Cochran doesn't want to play again. And I don't know if Dawn wants to play again. So I think all of those duos are not particularly likely. Next up, we have One World. And I think the first duo that comes to my mind from One World is Kim and Chelsea. I feel like Kim and Chelsea just kind of screams out to me as like the most blatant duo. However, the duo that I actually put on my cast here is not Kim and Chelsea, but Sabrina and Chelsea. Now, I don't think Sabrina and Chelsea are obviously that much of a duo necessarily, but I feel like they're enough of one in the sense that they obviously worked with Kim to get to the end of the game that production could make a story about them being a duo. And I think the main thing here is that both of them have been in the casting pool to return for quite a while. And both of them have made it pretty deep into casting shortlists to where I feel like both of them are semi-realistic returnees. So I decided, screw it, let's just put them on this cast. Again, like, at the end of the day, it's like I would rather see other duos more than Sabrina and Chelsea. But again, if I'm keeping this to semi-realism here, I do feel like Sabrina and Chelsea feels like a duo that I could see them putting together for a cast like this. Now for Philippines, where got a couple considerations here. First one was Abby and Pete, who would be a lot of fun, but I don't think they're super likely at this point. Obviously, you got Scoopin and Lisa, but I mean, come on. They're not bringing back Scoopin, and then Lisa, I don't even think wants to play again. And really, the main duo from this cast, again, another one of these all-time great duos, is Denise and Malcolm. However, again, I just don't feel like Denise wants to play again. Now, I do think out of these duos that are super prominent, that I do think there's one person that wouldn't play again, I do feel like this is the most likely of those, as I do feel like Denise, while she doesn't want to play again, she is extremely close to Malcolm to this day. And I think if it was a situation where like Malcolm really, really wanted to do it, I feel like he could easily convince Denise to say yes to it as well. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like I feel like that's enough stretches there to where I'm not really comfortable putting them on a semi-realistic cast. Especially when there is another duo that we will be talking about that I kind of feel fits the similar sort of mold. So because of that, I did not put Denise and Malcolm on the cast here. From Kara Moen, again, had some considerations. None of them made the cut. I think the major one for me was Eddie and Reynolds, who, like, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing again, but I just don't think they're super likely returnees. Considered Matt and Michael, but I don't think they're likely returnees either. And then Malcolm and Corinne. Again, if they're bringing back Malcolm, it's Malcolm and Denise. So they didn't make the cut. Blood versus Water, I already talked about Tyson and Jervis. I would have liked to put him on the cast, but again, I just feel like Tyson and Coach is a lot more likely. And the other consideration I had was Sierra and Hayden. Technically, again, Hayden, Caleb would have also been a duo, but again, rest in peace, Caleb. But Sierra and Hayden isn't the worst duo in the world either. It's just that, again, like I think obviously there is some hesitancies of bringing back Hayden, considering he hasn't been back at this point, which is still insane to me. And I think if there are those hesitancies there, I don't see why they would decide to bring him back for this cast, especially when like his partner in Sierra isn't even that strong of a dynamic duo there. So again, didn't put him on the cast. From Cagayan, I have a lot of considerations here. I did consider like a Tasha and Jatia, which I think would be interesting, but I don't know how high priority Tasha is at this point. Plus also like Jatia is also someone that I just don't know how they feel about her anymore. Obviously she was in consideration for Second Chance, and I believe Game Changers as well, but it's been a while, and she was an early boot, so I don't know how front of mind she really is. We have Spencer and Tasha as well that I consider, but again, I don't think Spencer wants to play again. And then after that, we have a lot of duos with Tony. We have Tony and Woo, Tony and Trish, Tony and Sarah. I think Tony and Sarah would be the one that's the most likely, but at the end of the day, it's like, again, one, Sarah doesn't want to play again. Two, I don't know how likely Tony would be willing to come back for, again, like a smaller scaled season like this. And three, it's like I don't even want to see it. Like, to be honest, I don't want to see Tony come back for Dynamic Duos cast. Like, I think if Tony comes back, I want it for Legends, I want it for Winners at War 2. I don't need to see him back for just a general all-star season. Now from San Juan del Sur, I have a couple considerations. We do have John and Jacqueline, who I think would be a decent amount into consideration. I think both of them are people that were in the casting pool for previous all-star seasons, particularly John, but I think their time is kind of faded to where I don't look at them as super likely returnees. The other duo that's like super prominent here is Natalie and Jeremy, and I think they're a lock for this cast if Jeremy wanted to play again, which from what I understand, he does not. So again, another duo that, again, I think if Jeremy wanted to, for sure they're on the cast, but realistically probably not happening. Now for Worlds Apart, where we have a few duos here, we do have Max and Shireen, which would be kind of funny because again their relationship has kind of deteriorated over time, but I don't think either of them are particularly likely returnees at this point. We do also have Jen and Haley, who I thought was an interesting duo at the time, but again, not really one that is super prominent nowadays. You got Carolyn and Tyler, who would be interesting, but again, like I think that would more so fit a Rivals season at this point than anything. But I did put a duo from this cast on there, also involving Carolyn, but instead her paired up with Mike. Now, I do have reservations here, namely with the fact that Mike wasn't on Winners at War. Again, I talked about that before with like someone like a Tina and like a Todd, where it's like if they didn't make Winners at War, then how likely is it that we're going to see them again? But for me, Mike does feel like the most realistic returnee out of the winners that didn't make it on Winners at War. Now, I don't know if there were some problems with him in production that got in the way. And again, it is worrying that also beyond Winners of War, he was also in consideration for Game Changers and got cut in favor of JT, which I think is also very questionable at this point. But Carolyn is someone that production has been very open about wanting to see play again. Carolyn has been very open about wanting to play again. And I do feel like her paired up with Mike feels like the most realistic option to me, so they made my cast. Next up for Cambodia, we have a few duos, but again, none of them made the cut. Jeremy and Steven would be interesting, but again, I don't think either of them want to play again. Kelly and Abby would be a lot of fun, but I don't think Kelly Wentworth wants to play again. And we have Sierra and Cass, which would be interesting, but again, I don't think Cass wants to play again. And I think even Sierra would be a question mark, so none of those made the cut. Now for Ko Wrong, where I surprisingly put 2 duos on the cast here. There's another cast later on that has 2 duos, but they're much more recent casts. So this feels kind of weird that Ko Wrong of all seasons is the other one to have 2 duos from it, but oh well. Obviously some duos that you consider that did not make the cut. Got Jason and Scott, who I wouldn't be opposed to seeing again, but I just don't know how likely they are in terms of how much production's really looking at them as returnees. We got a couple duos with Aubrey, particularly Aubrey and Ty and Aubrey and Neil, but I don't think Aubrey wants to play again at this point. Aubrey and Sydney would be a lot of fun as well. But for me, the most realistic pairing here from a lot of those people that I just mentioned is probably Michelle and Sydney. Now, again, there are reservations with Sydney in terms of how likely she is to return, where she has said for a while that she wouldn't return until she's like done with her bodybuilding career and everything, as obviously it took a lot out of her to play Survivor, for her to build everything back. But I wouldn't be that surprised if we see Sydney back in a recent All-Star season. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at this point, because I do feel like she probably wants to return. And again, pairing her up with Michelle, who I think is a very likely returnee to Survivor at this point, I do feel like that's the best option to go with here. Again, I think technically an Aubrey-Sydney duo would be more interesting, but I do feel like Michelle and Sydney seems more realistic. The other pairing I end up going with is one that I don't even want on the cast. I just feel like there's almost no way that production doesn't end up putting them on the cast because of how much it seems like CBS absolutely loves them as a duo. So I did put Ty and Caleb. Again, I have no interest in seeing Caleb play Survivor again. I have no interest in seeing Caleb on reality TV again. But again, Ty and Caleb seems to be a duo that CBS loves. They obviously put them back on Game Changers. They were in consideration to be on The Amazing Race. Obviously on the season of Ko Wrong, they got showed as a very prominent duo. Like, I do feel like more than likely, if they were to do a season like this, I definitely see Ty and Caleb being up for consideration. And I just said, screw it, put them on the cast, I guess. Again, like, I don't need to see them back, but I think this would be a pick that I could see CBS picking. Now for Millennials versus Gen X, where we have a couple duos here. None of them made the cut. Have Brett and Chris, who again were on The Amazing Race, but I don't think they're super likely Survivor returnees. We have Ken and David, who I think would be in consideration, but David is someone that now works for CBS. I don't think that's a super likely returnee at this point. And then we have Adam and Jay, who, while I think both of them are semi-realistic returnees, I don't feel like a dynamic duo season is the season for them. Again, I think they fit a rival season a lot better. So while they were in consideration here, they didn't end up making the cut. Now for Game Changers, where I did put one duo on the cast here. Now I did consider a couple pairs with Brad Culpepper and Troyzan, Brad Culpepper and Ty. Problem is, obviously, Troyzan, I don't know how likely they are to bring him back. And then Ty and Brad, again, feels like a rival season, more so. And also, I don't know how likely it is that Brad comes back. But the duo I did put on the cast here is one that was pretty prominent in the early merge of this season. And it is the duo that I was talking about with Suri. We do have Suri and Michaela. Again, for me, I wanted to get Suri on this cast. Again, this is the type of all-star season that I could definitely see Suri being on. The question is, who is her pair? And again, while I did really consider her and Amanda, again, to me, that kind of feels kind of rivalry in a way, especially with the way that Suri was bitter at Amanda after she voted her out. So I feel like Suri and Michaela makes a bit more sense. Plus, also, Michaela's a lot more recent of a player. I do feel like there's more of a likelihood that we see Michaela again on Survivor than Amanda. Next up, we have HHH, where I definitely had a lot of considerations, but no one that actually made the cut. To consider duos like Devin and Ashley, Ryan and Devin, Ryan and Chrissy. I think the problem with all of these duos is the fact that I don't think Ryan or Devin in particular want to return. Ryan, due to him having a pretty bad experience on the show itself, and Devin talking about how he would only return if it's a blood versus water season with his mom, which again, doesn't scream out to me as someone that's like super excited to be playing again. So none of those pairs made it. Did consider Ben and Lauren, but I don't think Ben is a super likely returning at this point. Like, I don't know how much Ben enjoyed his experience on Winners at War to where, like, I don't know if he would return at this point. So there was enough question mark there for me not to put them on. And I did also consider Mike and Joe, and they are probably the ones that made it the furthest into the process here, but even then, not super close to making it on. Now from Ghost Island, where we have two pretty prominent duos in my eyes that I did very much consider. First up, we have Laurel and Donathan, who, again, were one of the last few groups cut here. And the bigger question mark for me here was mainly Laurel. Like, I don't know how likely Laurel is as a returnee. I don't think she has a 0% chance, but even then, it's like, I don't think she wants to play again. I don't think she had a good experience on the show. So because I just decided to cut them. And then obviously we have the most prominent duo, probably in recent Survivor history, that being Dominic and Wendell. And I did not put them on the cast, largely because I don't think Wendell wants to play again at this point, which is weird because, like, as of right now, the last casting video that I'm releasing, I did put Wendell on that cast. But when I was in the process of making that video, the Battle of the Seasons casting video, that was before Wendell ended up getting his own show, and before Wendell had actually even stated now that he openly doesn't want to play again. And it's like, now with that information, again, like, I just don't really see Wendell taking the time out of his day to play Survivor again, especially now that he's, again, this host on HGTV. I don't think he needs Survivor at this point. And because I think the Wendell Dominic pair is very unlikely to return together, despite them, again, like, probably being locks if I made this video like a year ago. But at the point that we currently stand, I just don't see Wendell going back to Survivor. Now for David versus Goliath, we do have a few pairs here. A couple with Nick. I mean, we have Nick and Mike. We have Nick and Davey. Both of them would be pretty interesting returnees. Obviously, Mike White doesn't want to play again, so we can cut that one. Davey is a bit more interesting, but I don't know how likely it is that they bring Nick back. So I decided to cut both of them. Also consider Davey and Christian, but I think Christian was a better pair to be paired up with. Did consider Dan and John Hennigan, which would be interesting, but again, just better pairs out there. Also consider Angelina and John Hennigan, but don't know how likely John Hennigan is as a returnee to begin with. So obviously the duo that I went with here from David vs. Goliath is Christian and Gabby. Now, there is some hesitancies with Christian in terms of, is he going to have the time to go and play Survivor again? But I feel like out of all the duos from this cast, this is the most likely one. I feel like this is definitely one that production would want to get back, as both of them seem to be pretty high on production's wish lists, with Christian in particular being pretty high. Like, I do feel like both of these people are realistic returnees, and also we're such a prominent duo on the show that I think they're a shoo-in for the cast here. Now for Edge of Extinction, where I did have one duo make the cut. Again, probably not the duo that you are expecting. I consider Ron and Julie because they were there, and I would like to see Ron return, but I don't know how likely it is. They consider Lauren and Kelly, which I would have really liked to make on this cast, but it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, I don't think Kelly Wentworth wants to play Survivor again. I did want to put Rick and David on as well, but again, I don't think David can play again, even if he wanted to. So the duo I did put on here is still involving Rick Devens, but instead paired up with Chris. How much of a dynamic duo are they really? I don't know, but they did work together in the end game. They do have a storyline for return. Rick Devens is obviously one of the bigger locks to return to Survivor at some point down the road. And I do think Chris has an interesting arc on a return to where I don't think they would be opposed to bringing him back either. So I decided to make them the final male-male duo to make the cast here. Next up, we're moving on to Island of the Idols, where I surprisingly have two duos from this cast that made the cast. Now, these are the final two duos for the cast here, and were really the main two that I even considered to begin with. I did consider like Chelsea and Dean just because it would be kind of funny, but I didn't put them on. I considered Jamal and Jack. I just don't think Jack is a super likely returnee. I considered Karishma and Jamal, as I think that would be interesting, but I didn't put them on. I considered a Tommy and Dean, but I didn't put them on. But the two duos I did put on the cast here. First up, we do still have Tommy, but we have him with Lauren. Now, I think Lauren is a very likely returning. I think Lauren is one of the most likely returnees from this cast. I don't think Tommy's as likely of a returnee, if I'm being honest. But, again, like, to get Lauren back here, I think pairing her with Tommy, someone that she did work very well with within the game, I don't think is the worst thing in the world. Like, I mean, again, Tommy's not super interesting TV, but he does still seem to be someone that is very willing to play again. I mean, something that I didn't even notice at the time that I was putting this cast together until afterwards, that the 3 players from Survivor that are on the Challenge 37 all actually end up making the cast here in Michelle, Michaela, and Tommy. So again, like having Tommy on here, whatever. We'll continue that trend. Why not? Tommy and Lauren made the cut here. And the other duo is probably a bit more of a question mark here. Like, to be honest, I don't even know how production really feels about this duo at this point. I think at the time of filming, this duo definitely would have been consideration. But I do think now, I do think there's a bit more question marks due to fan reception. But I did still put Missy and Aaron on the cast. I think both of them are people that I would be very surprised if they weren't willing to play again. However, obviously with the reception to Missy being very negative by the end of the season due to the Dan situation, I do think there is some question marks on whether or not they would bring her back. But I do feel like Missy and Aaron were a pretty fun duo on the cast there. I think they were a duo that were playing pretty hard. I do think bringing that energy to this cast would be a lot of fun. So I did decide to put them on the cast here. Now, I didn't put any duos from Winners at War on the cast, but I might as well run through the ones I considered briefly. Again, I considered Yul and Sophie. I considered Nick and Michelle. I considered Denise and Kim. Obviously, Denise and Kim, I already talked about. I don't think Denise is super likely. Yul and Sophie, I don't think either of them are super likely to want to play again. And Nick and Michelle, I just don't know how incentivized production is to bring back Nick. So that is why I did not consider them at the end of the day. And there we go. I mean, that is my cast for Survivor. Dynamic duos. From Survivor Tocantins, we have Coach and Tyson. From Survivor One World, we have Sabrina and Chelsea. From Survivor Worlds Apart, we have Mike and Carolyn. From Survivor Co Wrong, we have Ty and Caleb, and Michelle and Sydney. From Survivor Game Changers, we have Suri and Michaela. From Survivor David versus Goliath, we have Christian and Gabby. From Survivor Edge of Extinction, we have Chris and Rick Devins. And from Survivor Island of the Idols, we have Tommy and Lauren and Missy and Aaron. So that is my cast for Survivor Dynamic Duos. I don't know exactly what the next casting video will be. I still have a couple ideas I want to run through, but those will be for down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.